Welcome to the Ultimate Bloons TD6 strategy series, where I'm going to be showing you strategies for every single tower from the Dart Monkey to the Beast Handler and every single path in between. This will show you how to diversify your setup and get better, along with seeing some stats, tips and tricks, and all of the strategies for every single one of the towers. And although that the series is geared more towards Chimps mode, this will also show you a lot of tips and tricks that apply to the standard game and will allow you to win with a new style. So the strat series is finally back, and we have Corvus this time. He is a pretty interesting hero, and I'm going to be honest right off the bat, I hate using this guy. He's just not worth the amount of micro that I have to put into him, in my opinion. But if you really like micro, feel free, just use him. But I do have some good tips on how to use him in the first place, so you won't really be seeing me much using him in challenges. But here we go, let's get into it. So starting off with all the items, we're starting with the spear, or as I would generally just call the lightning. This is one of the first four which you can activate for the 100 mana, or however much it is, and then it will drain automatically. So it will keep draining the mana, so just need to keep that in mind, but you can activate it on and off whenever. And it's really good. It has high pierce, decent damage. In the early game, it's particularly strong, and in the late game, it will still do a lot of work, which is really nice. It will also be able to deal with a lot of really hard rounds in the early game. As I said, high pierce, good damage. It will make the spirit really just be able to take out anything, like in the first 40 rounds, the leads, the zebras, rainbows, all that stuff. It will even do pretty well against ceramics, and in the late game, it will take down Moabs with ease too. So it's really nice, really powerful, strong, a good addition, and you'll probably be using the lightning a lot. Moving on to the next spell, we have aggression, which I guess pretty much just makes the spirit more aggressive. It turns into like a spiky red ball, which is cool. And I was testing this around, and I'm gonna be honest, it really didn't seem to do a whole lot really in the early game, when just like compared to just not using it at all. In the late game, a little bit more, but what I often do is, this is just one of the things that I'll pair with like other items, so you can just put like spear, aggression, and then that spiky thingamajigger, and it's just gonna do a lot better generally. So you can just like stack this with all of the top four, well I guess 3 of the top 4, because the malevolence really doesn't do much of anything, will actually get rid of your spirit, but just do 1, 2, and 4, and then you'll have like a cool combination that will do pretty well. On the other hand, as I said, the malevolence, which doesn't really do anything, this one it costs less, and it just removes the spirit, so the spirit is gone. You need to keep that in mind. The spirit does not exist with this, but it makes this aura like a ring of fire type thing, where everything around it does do some damage. And this looks like it take out those ceramics really well, which is pretty nice, but it does literally nothing to Moabs. And it used to like do nothing at all, but it did get a buff to do a little more damage against the Bloons, but still at the level 20, it doesn't really do anything to Moabs. It's just not really good unless you need to take a specifically large amount of Bloons out, I guess. Even then, there's some better alternatives. Next off, we have Storm, which I pretty much just call the spike thing. It just shoots out spikes, kind of like a tack shooter would shoot out tacks, and this is actually pretty good. It will take out a lot of things. It shoots out like in a radius, so often more than not some of the spikes that will shoot out in the front won't really get used, but it will do pretty well. Specifically against Moabs, I find it to do better. So when you have like this combined with the lightning and aggression, as I said, that combination is pretty good. You'll be doing a very good amount of damage to pretty much everything, which is really nice. So the Storm, definitely a good upgrade, and that is the last of the 4 top row, where you can just activate them on and off with the cost, the initial cost, and then the drain. Now the next items, you're going to pay up their flat fee, and they're going to go through their duration. They won't drain anything, but once they're out, they have a cooldown. So the first one is going to be Repel, which is kind of just like a tornado druid, kind of like isolated in one spot where the spirit is. Initially it won't really do anything to Moabs, and it will blow back some Bloons, but later on it will eventually blow back the Moabs, and it's actually pretty effective. I really like using Repel a lot. It's kind of similar to the Frost, except it works in a little bit different ways, and the Frost, it will give you some like issues with the damage types, like Sharp will not be able to damage the Frosted Bloons, but Repel is pretty darn effective, and I like it a lot. Next one is Echoes, and this is really kind of the best one. It's not like it does a lot of damage, but it allows other things to do a lot of damage. So why have one spirit when you could have two? And that is what Echo does. So this will pretty much just like double the other things, and you can use this on pretty much everything. Like even overload, you can double overload, double hands, double the entire like 1-3 or 1-2-4 combination up there that I'm showing just right now. It's just pretty darn effective, and really when it comes to the late game, you're gonna have to plan around like using the Echo, because pretty much everything wants Echo. Only some things can get Echo because it does have a cooldown. Next one is haste, which it is pretty cheap, and what it does is just makes the spirit move a lot faster, which can be useful here and there, but it's not like something that you'll be rushing to use every time. On some certain maps, I guess it can be useful. The one thing that I do note is that when you use the trample, which we will be looking at next, that thing is going to take forever and your spirit will be out of commission while that's going on. But if you use haste and trample, that thing will now speed way up, and it will actually be a lot more effective like that. Generally, you could use it just to make things more efficient, but it's not something that a lot of people would do, just because it takes a lot of effort to kind of hit another button on top of everything else, and not a lot of people do that. Next, we do have the trample, and the trample does kind of just like the same thing as a sword charge. It does have a pierce cap, but it will just go through the whole map, do some good damage, mainly to Bloons initially. In the initial run, just at a low level, it's not going to be doing much to Moabs, but when you upgrade Corvus, get him to a higher level, the trample is going to be able to do some more work, which is pretty cool. It isn't necessarily something that's like crazy though. It's just something that you can use if there's like a ton of ceramics or Moabs on the screen, or you have a lot of loops. Next, we have the Frost, which is kind of like the Repel, as I said before, but it freezes the Bloons and Moabs too at a later level, which is also pretty effective. And sometimes I even find it more effective because it can like deal more pierce. What they also can do, which I didn't mention for Repel, is clump things up, so high pierce towers can do a lot more work, which is really nice. But as I mentioned before, it can give some towers damage type issues, so that is something you need to keep in mind when using it. The next one is Ember, which is another really strong one. I like using Ember a lot. Not that I like using Corvus, but Ember is pretty cool, I'd say. Ember just drops the fire everywhere, and it's really effective. It can take out large swarms of Bloons early on, and then when leveled up, it will be able to deal with Moabs pretty well too. And so you can just put the Ember down, and fire will be everywhere, and it will destroy everything. Really cool spell that you definitely can use a lot, and you can combo this with other stuff too, which I'll talk about later. Then we have Hand. Now the next two, Hand and Overload, are two upgrades where they'll be able to do like a lot of direct damage, and Hand in particular will just be doing like the single target damage. It will just bring out a big hand and slap everything, which is pretty funny. It's going to be only in the Corvus range though, so you can use this with his Corvus ability to teleport, and you'll be able to move that hand around. It's going to be doing, again, best against single targets, so like PFBs, ZOMGs, but in particular, it's actually really good at taking out DDTs, particularly if you do Hand and Echo. Like this is even without Echo, but Hand and Echo will just be able to take out a lot of DDTs, which is really good. Overload is the other one of these where it just does a lot of damage. However, this one, whenever you use it, you are out of commission for a good while. Corvus will not have his spirit going everywhere, so Overload is just like the big, literally as it says, Overload, and it will just do a ton of damage. So you can use Echo Overload, and it will take out a good amount of stuff. It used to be able to like one-shot round 98, not anymore after a bunch of nerfs. If you damage stuff and then use Overload set on strong, it can still like one-shot things, but it takes a lot of effort to kind of get that done, and it doesn't always work. So that's something you need to keep in mind. There definitely is a lot of skill involved with some of these upgrades. The next one is the bottom row, which is kind of like miscellaneous stuff. The first one we have is Nourishment, which is what you're going to be using to get XP. When you're using Corvus, and if you want to use Corvus efficiently, you need to get to level 20 to be able to get all the good buffs and bonuses for every spell, and you need Nourishment to do that, so you're just constantly using Nourishment. Then we have the Hearts, and this one I don't really use a lot. In Chimps mode, you can use it to gain extra lives. The one really use that I see for it that I guess people would use is that on round 24, if that camo is about to leak, you can just use the Hearts to not have to deal with anything. But anything else, the Hearts like don't really stay for that long, so you're probably just gonna leak to somewhere in the camo wave. It's just really annoying to deal with. Even in challenges, I don't like to deal with it. On top of that, it can't take out like a whole Moab, so who cares about that? And in later, you're not getting like an insane amount of lives. Then you have Vision, which will allow Corvus to see camo. This can be pretty useful in the early game on a few camo rounds, although kind of like the hearts, it doesn't really last that long, so you are going to have to deal with those camos up front anyways. You can, as I mentioned before, kind of like use Vision and Heart together, but then that's just really annoying. It's inconsistent, and it's just a terrible thing to do, especially if you want a blackboard. I don't even do that for challenges. It will allow Corvus to see some DDTs, of course. That's kind of temporary though, so, and by that time, as I also mentioned before, you probably have something to remove the camo or see camo, so I don't really use it a whole lot. Then we have Recovery, which is the last spell, and this one will make the cooldowns go faster. One thing to note, it doesn't make Nourishment's cooldown go faster, so you're going to be pressed on how fast you can get level 20 by how many Nourishments you can get in. So every time you have max mana and you can hit Nourishment, I guess you can do it unless you really need to use some Corvus spells, which just in general, as a tip, you'd be looking kind of for tricky rounds where you might need to use a Corvus spell, and then from there you might be like, oh, I can't use Nourishment right now. But other than that, it's a lot of Nourishment, and that's the one thing that I don't like about Corvus. Well, really big thing I don't like about Corvus is that you have to constantly be using Nourishment if you want level 20. So moving on, let's take a look at some of these combos. These aren't all the spells combos that you can do, but first of all, I recommend using the top 3, as I mentioned, the first, second, and third spell. So all the top row besides Malevolence, and that's just going to be doing a very good amount of general damage. You can use it whenever, toggle it on and off. If you have mana, you can just use that and it will be doing pretty well. Then what's really nice is Echo and Repel, or Echo and Frost plus using Ember. This will allow everything to bunch up so you can use high pierce towers, but you can also use Ember and the flames will cover everything and will be doing a pretty good amount of damage. And as you probably can tell right now, Echo can be used with everything and it will just make it better. So you need to watch out what you're using Echo with. You have to use Echo at the right time because it will have a cooldown and all. The next thing that you can do is Hand. Obviously you could use it with Echo too, and this will just be slapping everything. It's crazy strong. Just look at all those mobs go away. It also did pretty good damage to that ZOMG. Of course, if it didn't time out, it would be able to slap those ZOMGs up too, and DDTs Hand is great with. And then after that, you also have Echo Overload, which you can kind of use to one-shot things. So in this example, I damaged those ZOMGs up a little bit. They're close to going down, and a well-timed Echo, or not Echo, I mean a well-timed Overload can one-shot all of that. So you need to be able to time the Overload really, really well. Now, there's not much margin for error to do that, and then if you do it right, you can overload everything. Now let's take a look at an example in Chimps, and I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how you'd use Corvus. Now, I didn't really mention that before, but just in this example and altogether, I'm going to talk about it, and that's kind of because Corvus doesn't really have any particular strategies. I did hear and read in actually multiple places that he can siphon off mana from necromancers, but I was trying to test that for this video, and it did not work at all. So if there's just like, if I'm just completely mistaken, that's not true, or there's something I'm missing, please let me know in the comments below. But other than that, if that is true, there isn't really necessarily like any synergy that you can do. Corvus will just do some damage by himself. You just need to be able to not like insta-kill everything at the front, which would make it so you can't get nourishments. You can either play, I guess, 2 ways, the lazy way or the not lazy way. Well, I guess the lazy way even just involves a lot of micro, but the not lazy way is going to involve a lot of micro, and it's really in the mid game trying to get all these nourishments. He was buffed a while ago, so he's getting more XP now, and you don't have to use the recovery for nourishment over and over again, which before that it was painful to use, like absolutely painful, but he was ridiculously overpowered, so I guess it was worth it. Now he's way weaker, like a lot of his abilities are worse at base level than compared to the level 20 now from since he was released, which is kind of crazy. So when he was released, he was totally busted, but now it's a lot of work for a pretty good amount of power, but to me it's just not worth it. So anyways, if you're using him lazy, you just plop him down and wait until like later on, and then you can use his abilities. But when you're doing that, he's just really weak in my opinion. If you use all the nourishments and get him up to level 20, which is a lot of effort, and you can't really use anti-stall towers to like make the game quicker, so it's gonna be slow game, so you can get Bloons in range and then grab them with the abilities and the nourishment all throughout the mid game. Then you'll get level 20, and if you have that, you have a good amount of power. It's actually like pretty darn strong. You have a lot of things, kind of like Geraldo, but you don't have to pay any of it. So it is pretty strong. It's just that after that, it's going to take a lot of high skill and a lot of constant micromanagement, which if I'm doing a black border, it's just something that I don't want to have to deal with. And in challenges, I don't really want to have to deal with that boring mid-game of constant nourishments. So just not really my type of hero, but for other people, could be. So when it comes to using the spells, of course, if you're going to be playing it optimally, you're going to be using that nourishment all throughout mid game, like I am here, to get level 20 by around like 95 on advanced maps. Depending how things go, you could actually get it even earlier, and if it's like an intermediate map, you're going to be getting it late. If it's a beginner map, I wouldn't bother using Corvus at all. Even on like intermediate maps too, I wouldn't really bother. So yeah, it kind of goes like that. But when you need to use the spells, you're gonna have to find either like tricky rounds that maybe your defense can't deal with, or in the beginning you're probably gonna be using spear, lightning a lot. Ember might be used, repel, echo, all that kind of stuff, just whenever you need it. In the mid game, the hand might be really useful. I wouldn't really use overload in the mid game because it just like, it doesn't really seem to work out. Hand is just better, or like using Echo and Ember and Repel all together just seems to work better there. And then, as I mentioned, there's some of the other items I just don't really like using because they're not consistent, like the Hearts, the Vision, the Malevolence doesn't really seem to do it for me. The Trample can be really nice for like 76 and 78, kind of like that, so you kind of get like the other heroes ceramic wave solo kind of thing. For 78 though, of course you can, no, I mean for 63 though, you can trample one wave. I kind of showed it in this video too, and then I go off to use like other things like Ember, Spear, that whole list at the top, and it does pretty well. Using this, I was able to get a really early perma spike, which in retrospect is kind of really useless. So I'm really going out of my way, honestly, to show using Corvus in a black border, because just in general, other heroes will do the exact same thing for way less effort, and that's just the one thing I don't like about it. So really the only reason why I see you would want to use Corvus is if you really enjoy doing all of this extra like button mashing and work and strategy and thinking. Other than that, you could use any other hero and do literally the exact same thing that I did here. So yeah, I guess that's kind of just like the best way to talk about it. And with that, I guess I'll open it up to a question for the comments. Do you like using Corvus? And if so, why? If not, it's probably for the same reason that I don't like using Corvus. Other reasons could be that's just like inconsistent, and like if you forget to press a button, it's gonna not go as well, or if you like press a button a little bit later than in another run, then it's not as good, because it's unlike Geraldo, which has the same panel of all this sorts of stuff. There's so many different things, and Geraldo is also a very complicated hero, but for Geraldo you can like buy the things placed down and then you start. It's not like mid-round actions like Corvus is, and when it comes to using mid-round actions, if you're trying to like plan out a strategy, it just becomes a huge hassle because nothing's going to be consistent, nothing's going to be the same, unlike Corvus where you can unlike Geraldo where you can be just like, buy Genie this round, it's going to work. So just something like that I don't really like. But anyways, to round it off, I got Glaive Lord, have permaspike in the back, mid-game with the Nevemis Ace. It's literally just something that many other heroes could do. Quincy could do this, Gwendolyn could do this, Oben could do this, probably all of them could do this exact same thing. Maybe not Ben, because you probably have a bad mid-game, but whatever. Other than that, Corvus is also pretty tricky to use. There is a lot of timing. You have to be able to time a lot of things right, and a lot of micromanagement. What I do is I have hotkeys for all 16 panels. So what I do is it's Shift 1 2 3 4, Shift QWER, Shift ASD, F and then Shift Z X C V, and that's just down the line for all of the panels. It took a little bit getting used to, and I did this just for a few challenges that I played with Corvus, even though I don't use them that much. So as you can see, I'm not touching my mouse when I'm using all of these, and it is a little bit of a hassle. Sometimes I press the wrong panel accidentally, but after a bit I did get used to it too. So if you aren't going to get used to using hotkeys with Corvus, which I completely understand because it's so much, it is also going to be still a big pain. So I feel like it's a pain manually pressing all of these buttons and all here and there, whether you plan to like learn to use hotkeys with it or not. So yeah, that's, I guess, pretty much all I have with Corvus. Way less strong than he used to be, but it's an interesting hero. So that's all, and goodbye. Thanks for watching. If you want to help out the channel, you can check out these new videos, like and subscribe for more content, support the channel by becoming a member, and joining the Discord to chat with the community. Bye!